Well, hi everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy. You know, one of the reasons that I set up this channel is I wanted to look into the conspiratorial mindset. Now, a couple of years ago, this gentleman, Mr. Brian Mullin, had a very popular YouTube channel that was widely discussed in the Flat Earth community. Now, in a series of videos, Mr. Mullin came out and questioned gravity, demonstrated a complete misunderstanding of basic vector addition, and just made obvious scientific errors. The problem that I have with it is Mr. Mullin is a licensed engineer. He knows better than this. He has been trained better than this. Yet he allows his beliefs to overwhelm his own knowledge base and training. So let's go ahead and have a look at these episodes from Brian Mullin. Now, the first example is the strange case of the rotating runway. So let's cue up the music and get going.
Hi, I'm Brian Mullin, and this is Balls Out Physics, Episode 1, Planes Flying on a Spinning Ball. About 7 months ago, or well, 8 months ago, beginning of the year on New Year's Day, I went and saw Interstellar, and I thought it was awesome. And it got me to go back and read this book for probably about the third time in my life, What is Relativity? It was written in 1959. Really good book, very good explanation of relative motion. From planes moving across the earth with balls bouncing inside them all the way up to things traveling at the speed of light. It gives a really good explanation of Einstein's theories. And so, here I am, my head in the clouds, thinking about relativity and space travel and all this craziness. And I was, just bored one day, sitting on the couch, looking through YouTube videos, and a couple Flat Earth conspiracy videos popped up in the that suggested videos to watch, and I'd seen those before, and I always had thought to myself, there's just no way, But I'm a very open-minded person, and I was, in the mood to watch something different, so I said, what the heck, I'll watch one of these, thinking it would be good for a laugh. Well, about halfway into it, I wasn't really laughing. I was actually questioning a lot of things, and one of the biggest things that caught my attention was planes flying on a spinning Earth, trying to land on north and south runways, because the Earth rotates from west to east.
Okay, so once again we're dealing with the classic, I didn't think Flat Earth was anything, I thought it was a silly thing, but finally I watched one and it changed my life. That would work for somebody that was not a professional engineer, but Brian is a professional engineer, so I'm actually kind of shocked that he fell down this rabbit hole. I think that there's probably an internal belief system that he has that is leading him astray here. But let's go ahead and look at the problem he's talking about. All right, so let's set Brian's problem up for him. We're going to save a lot of time because he was going through this very slowly, and I'm just going to go ahead and lay it out. So here we go. Here's our north, south, east, west line. Here is LAX. That's the Los Angeles airport. Over here, we have Jacksonville. They're some 2,000 miles apart. Now, his contention is that the Earth is rotating from west to east at 900 miles per hour. And an airplane takes off from an east-west runway in Los Angeles, flies about 500 miles an hour, and then has to make this turn to land on a north-south runway in Jacksonville. So let's let him go ahead and start explaining this.
So I started to look into this a lot, and what really surprised me at first is, I'm a structural engineer, and I've taken a lot of physics courses in my life, and I started to look into the curvature of the Earth and the rotation and the speeds of Earth, and it kind of blew my mind that I'd never really thought about how fast the Earth rotates or how much it actually curves. Here I am researching flat Earth theory, and I'm actually studying the curvature of Earth and the speed at which it rotates. I mean, there's some serious irony there.
Now, right here is where he begins to kind of go off the rails. You know, calculating the rotational speed of the Earth and the curvature of the Earth is something that we all did in middle school. So how did he make it through engineering school without ever thinking about the rotational speed of the Earth at the equator, or at any other latitude for that matter? I mean, seriously, how can you do that?
The speed of the Earth is 24,901 miles divided by 24 hours gives you 1,038 miles per hour. That's the instantaneous velocity at any point along the equator. I mean, that's what it has to be if everything we're told is true. So that's really fast. That's faster than the speed of sound.
Now here's where I have a problem with Brian. This is a basic engineering error. The speed of sound is about 720 miles an hour at sea level. Through the air. Through the air is the key concept. If there was a Cessna sitting on a runway on the equator, not moving at all, with the chocks under the wheels, according to Brian's reasoning, that plane would be breaking the speed of sound and we'd hear a sonic boom. That doesn't occur that way. You have to be moving through the air. The only way that that would work would be if the atmosphere of the Earth was not moving along with the surface of the Earth. Why doesn't Brian understand that?
Starting to wrap my head around how much curvature there should be, and that's quite a bit, and it's kind of hard to find it.
Now I'm going to toss another thing in here, and this is another thing that makes me very suspicious of Brian and his ability to apply engineering principles. Brian is a structural engineer, a civil engineer. He knows the difference between horizontal at a point on the Earth and level. Horizontal is perpendicular to the vertical. Level is a fixed elevation above the surface. And by surface, I mean the datum from which you measure elevation. That could be mean sea level. It could be a lake level. He has to know the difference between these two. Yet he's pretending as if he doesn't.
One of the first things I did is I set up a problem about the spinning planes. It was a physics problem. I'd studied relativity. I figured I could do this. The idea of this problem is that we are an observer, a stationary observer, looking at Earth, watching a plane fly. And this is based on a direct flight I took in college from JAX to LAX. The two airports are about 2,000 miles away from each other. And I flew there and then flew back, and I like doing the problem going back because it's more interesting that way. Because we're rotating with the Earth, and also a lot of some flat earthers out there have said things like, if the Earth is rotating 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, planes can't fly that fast, so they can't catch up to it, and that's not really true, because if the plane's already rotating with the Earth when it takes off, it's the speed it gains in the air is added to the initial speed it already had, so that's not true. But there is a problem here.
Now this is the part of the video that confuses me the most. Now Brian understands that when you take off from the runway, if the rotation is 1,000 miles an hour and your aircraft speed is 500 miles an hour, you don't fall backwards. That rotational speed is imparted on the aircraft. So let's look at a helicopter. Now, it's at an airport that's moving 800 miles per hour. When it's sitting right there on the airport runway, what's the speed of the helicopter? It's 800 miles an hour because it's moving along with the airport. If the helicopter goes straight up and hovers, what's its speed? It's still 800 miles an hour because that's the rotational speed of the Earth. But more importantly, what's its speed in relationship to the ground? 0. Now Brian seems to understand this because when he's talking about the airplane and the airplane sitting on the runway at LAX, he thinks that the Earth is rotating about 900 miles an hour at LAX. So when the airplane is sitting on the runway, it's going at 900 miles an hour with the rotation of the Earth. Its speed relative to the surface of the Earth is 0. When it takes off and flies 500 miles an hour towards Jacksonville, it keeps the rotational speed of the Earth 900 miles an hour. But its speed over the ground is only 500 miles an hour, which is why it takes the same amount of time to go from west to east, as from east to west, as from north to south. If you have to cross 2,000 miles of land and your plane goes 500 miles an hour, it's going to take you 4 hours no matter what direction you're going.
You know, they're not at the equator. They're north of the equator, a little over 2,000 miles. Both of them. You know, Jacksonville's over here in Florida, and LAX is over here, California. LAX is about 250 miles north. I think 250 miles north of JAX in Jacksonville. But we're going to say that they're at the same latitude, just to keep it easy, to keep the problem easy. And so, as I was showing you on the ball, you know, as you move up away from the equator, the diameter of the Earth around the center axis decreases, so your velocity decreases. You can calculate this, and I played around with some numbers, and I got, you know, between 850 and 900 miles an hour for both airports. So I just said, let's just use 900, just to keep it easy. You know, it's a hypothetical problem, but it is based on reality. So the reality we're all taught to believe. So here we are. We're going to fly back to JAX. Sitting on the airport in LAX, we're going 900 miles an hour east. You know, the Earth is moving that fast, but we can't feel it because everything's stuck to it, right? So we're told. So the plane takes off and gets up to its cruising altitude, whatever that is for the day, 30,000, 33,000 feet, whatever they're going to fly at. And it gets up to a cruising speed of, let's say, the velocity of the plane, VP, equals 600 miles per hour. Now, since it was already moving, the velocity of the plane relative to Earth, which we'll call VPE, is now 600 plus 900 miles an hour gives us 1,500 miles per hour. This thing's really moving. Okay, but it's relative velocity, so it only seems like 600 miles per hour to us on the plane, right?
Now remember, Brian's narrative is that the Earth is not a rotating sphere. And he is presenting this information to try and convince you, the audience, that the Earth is not a rotating sphere. So let's go see where we're standing now. He acknowledges that while sitting on the airport, we're doing 900 miles an hour. Now the plane takes off and he says it goes up to 600 miles an hour. We'll go ahead and make that a 6 so it's nice and even. He's actually saying two things. First of all, first he says that the speed of the aircraft relative to the Earth is 600 plus 900. That's 1,500 miles an hour. Now, that would be true if you were off the Earth and at a stationary point in space, watching the Earth rotate at 900 miles an hour and watching the plane go 600 miles an hour in the direction of the rotation. Okay, that would be a stationary frame of reference looking at the rotating Earth with the airplane flying over it. But we're not at a point in space. We are on Earth. Now, the person that's standing right here and looks up at the plane, how fast is that plane moving for? 600 miles an hour. Because this guy's doing 900 miles an hour too. The plane still has the 900 miles an hour imparted from sitting on the runway, and its engines are moving at 600 miles an hour relative to the ground. If it was all at 900 miles an hour, nothing would be moving because they're all moving together. This is basic vector math, and this is something that's well within the training of an engineer. This is like bread and butter for an engineer. I don't understand why he's having a problem understanding this.
But here's where we run into a problem. Let's say there's a north-south runway in Jacksonville. Now, Jacksonville's runways are actually orientated kind of 45 degrees northwest and northeast, but north-south runways do exist. You can go look on Google Earth, you'll find them. They're all over the place. And of course, LAX's runways all point east-west, and they're right on the water, or right on the ocean. So we get up here to this point, you know, right before they make the turn, the plane slows down. Okay, this is where the problem comes in. Planes cannot stop flying before they make a turn. They can't go to zero, and going to zero would bring you back to 900 miles per hour that you started at. But you can't go to zero because a plane has to keep flying forward to have uplift on the wings and keep itself in the air. You know, duh. So it's going to slow down before it makes the turn, but it's not going to zero. So let's say it slows down to 300 miles per hour. You know, and then it also this is the speed it slows down to before it makes this 90-degree turn, or this right angle turn. So here, the plane, right before it makes the turn, is traveling at VP prime equals 300 miles per hour. And VP prime is just the new speed, okay, or the new velocity in this direction. But it's also got its relative velocity to Earth, which would be VPE prime, is now 300 from 1500 is 1200 miles per hour. So now, as this plane goes through the turn, when it gets here, say the midpoint of the turn, it's got a vector of 300 miles per hour, which is its airspeed, this VP prime in this direction, but it also still has this velocity of VPE prime right up here, 1200 miles per hour.
And there's the confusion that Brian's having. Now, here's the situation that he gave us. Plane is going 600 miles an hour west to east. Now, the only speed relative to the ground is that 600 miles an hour. The rotational speed was picked up here in LAX, and it was retained by the aircraft, but the aircraft is flying at 600 miles an hour over the ground. So now he's got him slowing down to 300 miles an hour. And again, we're going from west to east. All right. Now, all of this 300 miles an hour is directed from the west to the east. Now, when he turns to the southeast, some of this is going from west to east, and some of that thrust is going from north to south, but the speed of the airplane, the hypotenuse of that triangle, is still 300 miles an hour. As it lines up to go due south, it's still going 300 miles an hour, but it's all directed from north to south. Now, the plane's still going 900 miles an hour with the rotation. The runway is going 900 miles an hour with the rotation. The air is going 900 miles an hour with the rotation. They aren't moving relative to each other. The only thing that's moving is this airplane lined up on that runway and approaching it at 300 miles an hour. It's a simple problem. This is basic vector addition. Brian, as a structural engineer, uses vectors like this to determine loads on roof trusses and floors and load-bearing walls. He has to understand this to do his job. Why is this confusing him?
Because the Earth is spinning under it, you know, and it had that initial speed when it took off. The only way you can get rid of that is if you make the Earth stop spinning. So, you know, when you get down here and you're trying to line up with the runway, you're going 300 miles per hour towards it. Make that look a little better. You know, you still got VP prime here, but you also have VPE prime. Well, there's a real problem there, because the airport, the ground over here, is moving, you can see that, at 900 miles per hour. You know, except the velocity of the Earth is the same at both airports. But the plane is moving to the east still at 1200 miles per hour. The plane is moving faster than the runway. They can't line up.
What's going on, Brian, is that you're totally misunderstanding the problem. You seem to think that the plane still has that 900 miles an hour vector going to the east, but the ground no longer has that 900 mile an hour vector, so you would be sliding to the east, as you say. However, they're both going east at 900 miles an hour, and that vector is not like that. It's a direct north-south vector as it's lining up on the airport. Now, that was pretty much all there was to it for this first Brian Mullin's video. So, let's just go ahead and recap what we have. We have this problem where we're flying from LAX, and he's making a big point of calling it a west to east runway. And you're flying across the country and going to Jacksonville, which he again is making a big point. You have a north-south runway. Now, what he seems to think is even though the velocity of the aircraft is only 600 miles an hour relative to the ground, he seems to selectively want to add this 900 miles an hour. So yes, this entire system is moving from west to east at 900 miles an hour. We don't need to pay attention to that anymore. The only thing we do need to pay attention to is this aircraft. And as the plane makes a turn, we understand the vectors as he just showed. You've got some component going east and you have some component going south. However, the overall speed of the aircraft is still the 300 miles an hour. And again, the entire system is moving from west to east at 900 miles an hour. So the only speed relative to the ground is that 300 miles an hour going from north to south. Now, Mr. Mullins was widely applauded in the flat earth community because he brought his engineering degree and his prestige as an engineer to the flat earth argument. He messed up a high school level problem. You know, one minute he adds the 900 and then he acknowledges that it doesn't count, and then he tries to add it again, saying the plane would have to slip off to the east. You know, if he was coming in on a freshman physics class in high school, he'd fail that question on a test. And the only question remains is, why would an engineer mess that up? Well, it's because he's so anxious to promote his narrative. He's letting that get in the way of his judgment. So this is Bob the Science Guy signing out from Northern Michigan. Thank you very much for stopping by. We're going to have more from Brian Mullins on a weekly basis because it demonstrates how badly a conspiracy can cloud your thought process. So we'll see how he makes his mistakes and we'll put the correct information out. Take care, guys.
Mama, please make them hear me, or I can't teach them anymore. This rabbit hole's too deep for me. Feel my brain getting real sore. Bob the Science Guy. Bob the Science Guy.